When I think back over the years about WrestleManias that could have been more, and ultimately leave me asking the questions of what if and what could have been and what should have been, at least in my opinion, anyways, WrestleMania 8 clearly tops the list. Now, don't get me wrong, this show was a success in its own way for the WWF. They drew over 60,000 people to the Hoosier Dome there in Indianapolis, Indiana, and all that is fine and good. But when I think back to this show and compare it to other WrestleManias over the years, it might be, to me, the most disappointing WrestleMania of all time. And I think what happens sometimes is just like in life and in business, and you see this with sports teams as well, there's a tendency sometimes to overthink things and overanalyze things and go with the wouldas, the couldas, the shouldas. And as a result, instead of finding reasons that you already know to be true to do something, you find excuses not to do something. And that to me kind of crystallizes what ended up happening and not happening here at WrestleMania 8. But more about that in a little bit. Now, I do not feel that WrestleMania 8 is one of the all-time great epic WrestleManias. Like I said, it goes more in the disappointment category, but I don't want that to necessarily come across that this was a bad or terrible WrestleMania, because it was not that either. There were a couple of really good matches on this card, one outstanding match on this card, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And maybe argue two outstanding matches on this card. One thing I always go back and love about this WrestleMania is the commentary team, Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan. I love the chemistry between Vince and Jesse over the years. I love the chemistry between Gorilla and Jesse. And there was an entirely different, equally awesome, unique dynamic between Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan. And they were outstanding here. One thing that always stands out to me every year when I go back, every year I go back and watch every single WrestleMania. It helps get me excited for WrestleMania season. One thing that always stands out to me about WrestleMania 8 is that at the beginning of the show, the arena was like half empty. I still don't know to this day what was causing the problems, whether it was miscommunication with the people about what time the show started, were there just that many traffic backups and traffic issues? I don't really know. But you see at the beginning of the show, the stands aren't full. As the show progresses, it eventually gets to that point. But it was very awkward to see for a WrestleMania, something you definitely wouldn't anticipate here in 2014. The show actually kicked off with a pretty solid, opening match between the Heartbreak Kid, the newly christened Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, and El Matador, Tito Santana. This was a good opening match, a good, kind of introductory match for Shawn Michaels on the biggest stage of them all as a singles competitor. He goes over here, and like I said, when they talk about Shawn Michaels and whether or not he's Mr. WrestleMania, the one thing I can say for him is that, man, over the years, he had a lot of really good WrestleMania matches. And this one here, Shawn Michaels, Tito Santana, it's not one that I think necessarily always gets the credit that it deserves. It was a good WrestleMania match. If you started off every WrestleMania with a match like Shawn Michaels versus Tito Santana, I bet you'd be very impressed and very pleased if you were a fan or if you were somebody putting together and booking the show. Now, the next match is a continuation of what happened the year before in terms of The Undertaker wrestling at WrestleMania and winning at WrestleMania. And the great thing about this to me as I go back and watch it is, to me, it shows the true greatness of Jake the Snake Roberts as a character and as a performer. Now, heading into this, Jake was leaving after WrestleMania 8, and he talked about this on his Pick Your Poison DVD. Talking about he already had an agreement brokered through his dad with WCW. He was going to become one of their highest paid guys. He was going to get a huge deal. And he basically was begging Vince for his release. And according to him said, if you don't give me my release, I'm not going to go out there and wrestle Undertaker. So Vince relented. He said, you can have the match and then you can get your release. You have to go out there and wrestle the match first. And that's what happened. But I think when you look at Jake the Snake Roberts, why I think this is such an indication of his true greatness as a performer. You look at The Undertaker. Look at The Undertaker, especially back here at the beginning of 1992. This was a guy that had come in as a dominant monster heel that was kicking ass. He had already won the WWF Championship by beating Hulk Hogan. I mean, this guy was already being established as a big-time name and a big-time future draw and a future building block and star that the company could rely upon going into the 90s. But Jake the Snake Roberts was so great in his role and so great as a heel that he managed to take a creepy-looking giant dead man motherfucker like The Undertaker and his equally creepy-looking manager, the kind of walrus-looking Paul Bearer, and turned him babyface. And the shit got over and it worked to the point where Undertaker was working as a babyface for the next several years. Now, we could sit there and talk about whether that was Vince's intended plan. It doesn't matter. At some point in time, you have to have that catalyst that makes it work. And this, of course, is coming off of the heels of Jake the Snake Roberts' incredible program to me with the Macho Man Randy Savage. Outstanding stuff. And this is where Taker ultimately saves Macho Man and Elizabeth for getting hit behind the curtain by Jake the Snake with the chair. And that's where you get to this match here. The match is not exactly anything outstanding. It doesn't need to be. It really, you know, you talk about Taker beating Superfly Jimmy Snuka at WrestleMania 7. Now he comes back the next year at WrestleMania 8, and he beats a big-time star like the Jake the Snake Roberts. That is something that takes a guy to a whole different level. It really worked here. The dynamic of this feud really worked here. Jake's promo work during this rivalry, during this feud, I think was also outstanding. Some of his best work, frankly. And like I said, it's owed a lot to the pure genius and talent of a Jake the Snake Roberts that an Undertaker was able to successfully turn babyface like he did. And then the next match is one of those two really super matches on this card, and that is Bret the Hitman Hart versus Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental title. Now, I know Piper has sat there and said in the past that this belt really didn't mean anything to him, but as somebody that was a Piper fan, it meant a lot to me. The fact that he finally got a title and the fact that he finally was getting his moment, and I felt kind of his just due. Yeah, it wasn't the World Championship, but it still meant something. And Piper took that opportunity, took that title, and helped make a new single star in Bret the Hitman Hart. Now, Bret Hart at this time had broken off. He was doing his own thing, and, you know, he was an incredibly talented in-ring performer. But he needed a rub. He needed somebody to start to really elevate his profile, and what better guy to do that on the biggest stage than Roddy Piper? And the incredibly great thing about this, you know, when you've got Roddy Piper talking about how Mama Hart, Helen Hart, used to sit there and make them sandwiches. You only put one piece of bologna on there, but I didn't care because I was hungry. They worked this as face versus face. And to me, again, I think that speaks to the true talent of a Roddy Piper. You would think that he would have had to work heel to really get Bret Hart over in a monster way as a babyface, and he didn't need to do that at all. You have this kind of serious button-down babyface in Bret Hart, and that's who he was, and that's what he was going to be down the road. And you kind of had this loosey-goosey, off-the-wall babyface that could go farther. He could sit there and go over the edge more and still have people love him and respect him, and Roddy Piper. And the dynamics of this match worked really, really well. Really, really well. I feel, again, an incredibly underrated match in terms of great matches in WrestleMania history. One of the best Intercontinental Championship matches in WrestleMania history. It was a physical encounter. I saw Piper do some stuff I don't think I ever really saw him do. You know, he was known for working one way and one type of style, and he totally changed his dynamic and his style in this match, and it really helped make the match. And then, of course, Bret Hart being the excellence of execution and how good he was as an in-ring performer. This match is magic. Again, when I talk about the opening match in this card, Shawn Michaels versus Tito Santana, you wish every WrestleMania had that type of quality match as an opener. Imagine if every WrestleMania had a Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper quality type of Intercontinental Championship match. My goodness. Imagine how much more likely every year's WrestleMania would be if you did that. Now, you had some other matches here that are kind of, let's be really realistic here, forgettable. You know, you had the big multi-man tag. Boss Man's team wins, and whatever. Tatanka beats the model Rick Martel. Again, short match, but hey, it is what it is, and this was at a time where they were trying to create another star here in Tatanka. Owen Hart beats Skinner in very short order. I still can't believe Skinner got a WrestleMania match, but hey, Owen Hart, the Rocket Owen Hart gets a WrestleMania victory. Nothing wrong with that. The tag team title match, to me, is always one of those things that it could have been so much more, and it was very disappointing. The Natural Disasters versus Money Incorporated. Now, the Natural Disasters have won, but they didn't win the belts because they won via countout. And the thing that's always disappointing to me about this is that this was supposed to be LOD. This was supposed to be the Road Warriors. This was supposed to be their moment at a WrestleMania to win the fucking WWF Tag Team titles. And that is exactly what the plans are. And according to somebody who would know better than anybody else, when I asked him a couple of years ago, he did say it was because Hawk was suspended at the time, so they had to go with something else. You still got the really awesome appearance with them getting interviewed on that side stage, which I miss. I wish they would utilize that much more often. At WrestleMania, here's Hawk, here's Animal, and they introduce their manager, Precious Paul Ellering. Outstanding stuff. Like I said, the only real disappointment to me about this is the fact that LOD didn't introduce Paul Ellering and then go on to win the tag titles that night. That was a big disappointment to me anyways. But then we get to what made this pay-per-view unique in a way. Still kind of makes it unique in a way, but also makes it an utter disappointment in a lot of ways. You had two headline matches, if you will, two main events. The only time the WWE has ever really officially used the two main event type of label. Of course, I'm referring to the Macho Man Randy Savage versus Ric Flair for the WWF Championship, and then the match that closed the show, Hulk Hogan versus Sid Justice, who would later go on, of course, to be the legend himself, Psycho Sid. Okay. Now, you got Ric Flair. You're bringing in fucking Ric Flair. The entire debate among wrestling fans around the country during the 80s was who's the better star? Who's the better wrestler? Who's the better champion? Is it Hulk Hogan or is it Ric Flair? And then you find a way to not only get Ric Flair, but Ric Flair brings the WCW World Heavyweight Championship with him to the damn company. Who's the real champion? And then when we get to the Royal Rumble, you have Ric Flair win the Royal Rumble and become the undisputed WWF champion. Nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing wrong with that. It was the right thing to do at the time. And you would think on the surface would set up an incredible no-brainer slam dunk matchup at WrestleMania between Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. Who's the real freaking world champion? Now, I know the reasons WWE's tried to put out there over the years, but the bottom line is I don't accept that, and I will never accept that. Now, do I think it could have been something where Hogan wasn't going to be around and he didn't want to lose to Flair, but the company wasn't going to put him in the title match and have him beat Flair if he was just going to turn around and leave the company for a period of time? Was it a thing of Flair not wanting to lose to Hogan? I'm sure there were egos involved. I'm sure there was money involved. You know, the whole BS about they did them some on live events and it didn't draw what they anticipated, bullshit. That's what I'm talking about again, is sometimes we find excuses not to do something instead of finding reasons to do something. This to me is a clear-cut example of KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Just think about this for a second. You have Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, the two unquestioned, so to speak, wrestlers of the 1980s, and they are both in the freaking company at the same time. Flair coming over with the WCW title. Who's the real world champion? And you don't give us that match at WrestleMania 8. There is no excuse for that. Because sometimes there's only one opportunity to do it. There's only one time to do it. And there's only one moment to do it. And if I had to venture a guess, even though he may never admit it in public, or out loud at least, one of Vince's greatest regrets is that WrestleMania 8, he didn't do Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair for the undisputed WWF Championship. He basically served up that concept and opportunity to Ted Turner a couple of years later at Bash at the Beach 94, or whatever the fuck. He gave it away basically to WCW and said, no, we didn't want to go in that direction. Well, by WrestleMania 9, Flair's not on the show. Hogan's coming out in this crappy finish, beating Yokozuna in like 21 seconds. And it's like we got robbed. Two of the great WrestleMania matches to me that never happened were Hogan versus Austin and Hogan versus Flair here at WrestleMania 8. Now, with that being said, it did present a great opportunity for a great feud, and the Macho Man Randy Savage stepped right in, and he and Ric Flair had an incredible feud. I love the doctor photos with Miss Elizabeth. Outstanding. And then you get this title match here at WrestleMania 8, and these guys, to me, tore the house down. Yeah, kind of awkward feeling finish, but this was the match of the night. This was the type of quality match you would expect out of these two great performers in a Savage and a Flair at the biggest stage and the biggest show and the biggest spotlight that the professional wrestling business can ever have, a WrestleMania. What a tragic shame that this match was buried in the middle of a fucking card on the show. What a damn shame. You imagine how happy you would have sent all the people home with if he would have had Savage beat Flair. And what a statement that was, too. That it wasn't Hogan that said he was the real world champion and ended up being the real world champion. It was Flair who came in saying he's the real world champion. He wins the belt at Royal Rumble, and then here comes Savage to win it back from him. And it had been several years since Savage had been champion. And this time it was as a babyface, so everybody, all the fans could enjoy it. And it was a tremendous moment. And one of my favorite WrestleMania moments, just still clouded in the fact that this match fucking mid-carded. Why? So that way my hero, the ultimate egomaniac, the one that the Breakfast Club themselves bow down to, Hulk Hogan, could sit there and take any steamer mustard away from Sid Justice being the babyface replacement to Hulk Hogan, which is what he should have been and originally designed to do, and decided they wanted to go out there and have a physique man's crappy main event match to close out this show. You know, this was bad. This was easily, to me, Hogan's worst ever match at a WrestleMania, and it's not even close. This just didn't work. The whole dynamics of this were screwed up. And you have this match to have Papa Shango interfere to ultimately, your big closing dramatic moment is the return of the Ultimate Warrior. And as great as that was, and as epic as that was, and as awesome as that was, we didn't need that to close out the show. This is the match that should have been in the mid-card. Savage and Flair, not just because it was for the title, but because of what it was representing, that should have been the main event, if they were going to do it this way. But ultimately, when all's said and done, and when all comes to pass, you had Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, the two wrestlers of the 80s, in your same damn company, and you decided to go in a different direction for WrestleMania 8. Now, sometimes you can sit there and say, well, Schleg Daddy, you take this shit way too seriously, and maybe I do. Maybe I do. I love to have a lot of fun with professional wrestling. I love it. I always have, and I always will. But don't ever mistake this. There are certain things that still to this day stick in my heart. They stick in my crawl, and they bother me, and they eat away at me. And they still carry a grudge and a resentment towards the WWE. And one of those things is WrestleMania 8. You could have had a once-in-a-lifetime type of show. And instead, you just gave us a show with a couple of good matches and kind of a lame-ass finish and a forgettable WrestleMania. What a tragedy and how sad. And this is, again, like I said, should be proof positive example of sometimes it's best not to overthink it, best not to get too cute. Do what you know is best. It's something the WWE is battling with right now heading into WrestleMania 30. Keep it simple, stupid. That's all I got to say. I'm still pissed off 20 plus years later that I was deprived of Hogan and Flair at a WrestleMania. Imagine what that could have done.